The entire village buzzed with excitement. But inside Linus's compound, the excitement tasted different. Susu was already busy preparing her daughter Apple. Every morning, she made Apple stand in the middle of the room while she corrected her posture.
Apple, to smile, lift the corners of your mouth.
Like this?
Good. Now, chin up and walk with confidence.
Okay.
She taught her how to walk slowly, how to lift her chin, how to smile without showing too much teeth. She practiced greetings with her. When the prince looks at you, don't rush your words, Susu said. Speak softly. Let him lean in to hear you. Apple laughed, enjoying every moment. Meanwhile, Twinkle was in the kitchen. Her hands were red from pounding pepper. Sweat rolled down her face as she walked, the sound of the mortar echoing through the compound. Each time she paused to rest, Susu's voice cut through the air. Why are you slowing down? Are you lazy like your mother? Twinkle said nothing. She never did. Susu leaned close to her daughter and whispered, When you become the prince's wife, this girl will follow you everywhere. Apple's eyes widened. She will wake before dawn to fetch water, Susu continued. She will wash your clothes, cook your food, carry your things. Apple smiled slowly. Will she kneel when I talk to her? She asked. Susu smiled back. She will kneel even before you speak. Apple clapped her hands excitedly. Twinkle heard everything. She kept pounding. That night, Apple sat alone in her room, staring at the ceiling, imagining herself in royal clothes. She pictured servants bowing, drums beating her name, and Twinkle running behind her, breathless. She giggled to herself. Twinkle, on the other hand, sat outside under the orange tree, staring into the dark. She knew she wouldn't dance. She didn't even know how to. But deep inside, she still felt a small spark of happiness. She wanted to watch, just watch, to see the beautiful maidens dance in colorful wrappers, hear the drums, feel like part of the village, even if only from afar. She didn't know her stepmother had other plans. The morning of the festival arrived. Linus had traveled for a business trip. Drums echoed from the palace. Women tied their wrappers. Maidens laughed and hurried past the compound, their anklets jingling. Susu called Twinkle. Twinkle rushed in, her heart pounding. Susu pointed to a large bowl on the floor. Inside it was ash, thick grey ash. Then Susu poured a sack of rice into it. The grains disappeared into the ashes. Twinkle froze. Separate them, Susu said calmly. Twinkle looked up confused. Separate what? The rice from the ashes, Susu replied. Twinkle's eyes filled with tears. How? How will I do that? She whispered. Susu crossed her arms. Until every single grain is separated, you will not step near the palace. Apple burst into laughter. Please, she begged. Please, let me just go and watch. I won't dance, I promise. Susu laughed coldly. You? Watch royalty? Finish your work. She turned to Apple. Come, the prince won't wait. Mother and daughter walked away, laughing. Their laughter followed Twinkle like a curse. Twinkle stared at the bowl. Ashes, rice. Her hands shook as she picked the first grain. Ash coated her fingers. Tears dropped into the bowl. The drums grew louder. The festival had begun. Twinkle sobbed quietly, surrounded by ashes, unaware that this cruel task was about to awaken something that Susu never planned for. Twinkle's fingers trembled as she picked grain after grain from the ashes. Her tears fell freely now. Then she remembered the tree. Whenever you need help, come to me. She didn't think twice. Twinkle lifted the heavy bowl and ran. The village was strangely quiet. Every compound empty, every road deserted. Everyone had gone to the palace. Her feet burned as she ran past huts and farms. When she reached the riverbank, she stumbled and fell at the foot of the tree. She dropped the bowl and broke down. Please help me. Do not cry, my daughter, the tree said gently. They will not let me go, she cried. They gave me ashes instead of freedom. The tree's voice was calm. You were never meant to watch. You were meant to dance. Twinkle shook her head in disbelief. What dance? I don't even know how to dance. You will dance, the tree replied, and when you do, no one will recognize you. They will see a queen, the tree continued, not a servant, not a forgotten child, an entirely different person. Before Twinkle could speak again, the ground trembled softly. The rice and ash appeared back in the compound, perfectly separated. A gentle light wrapped around her body like morning sun. Her clothes faded away. In their place appeared an elegant dress, soft, flowing and radiant. Diamonds shimmered at her neck, catching the light. A silver crown rested gently on her head, and her feet were shining in diamond shoes. Twinkle stared at herself in disbelief. She was beautiful. Not the kind of beauty people argued over, but the kind that silenced a room. You must listen carefully, the tree said. Once the first dance ends, you must leave the palace immediately. Before you leave the palace, place your crown on the sunflower in the palace garden. Why? She asked. The time will come, the tree replied, but you must not stay longer than you are told. A carriage appeared, golden, glowing, pulled by white horses that stamped the ground impatiently. Twinkle stepped inside, her heart pounding. As the carriage rolled toward the palace, the drums grew louder. The palace gate stood wide open. Inside, maidens were already dancing. Apple stood among them dressed in bright fabric, smiling confidently as Susu watched from the crowd with pride. Then the music shifted. The crowd turned. The carriage stopped. Twinkle stepped out. Gasps rippled through the palace like fire. Whispers followed her footsteps. Who is she? From which kingdom? Have you ever seen such grace? Even the prince leaned forward on his throne. Twinkle moved to the center of the courtyard, and somewhere in the crowd, Susu narrowed her eyes.
The drums changed rhythm. A deeper beat rolled through the palace courtyard, slow and commanding, as Twinkle stepped forward. Every eye followed her movement. The way her feet touched the ground, the way her arms floated through the air, as if guided by something unseen. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She moved like someone who had always belonged there. Then the prince stood up and walked straight toward her. Gasps echoed. Twinkle's heart raced, but her face remained calm. When the prince reached her, he stretched out his hand. She placed hers in his without a word, and they began to dance. The courtyard disappeared. There was no crowd, no music, no watching eyes, just the two of them. The villagers whispered among themselves, "Who is she? I have never seen her before. Which village did she come from? Look at the way the prince is looking at her." At the edge of the courtyard, Susu's smile vanished. Her fingers curled tightly around her wrapper as anger boiled inside her chest. She turned sharply and signaled to Apple with her eyes, "Dance harder." Apple nodded and threw herself into the rhythm, spinning, jumping, smiling widely. She danced with all the strength in her body, desperate to be noticed. But the prince did not look at her. He did not look at any of the other maidens. His eyes never left the mysterious maiden dancing in front of him. Even the other girls, who were meant to be her rivals, forgot themselves. They stopped dancing. They stopped watching each other. They stopped feeling envy. They watched in awe. The stage was no longer a festival ground. It belonged to Twinkle and the prince. They moved in perfect harmony. Every step matched. Every turn answered another. It was as if they had practiced together for years. The prince smiled at her. She smiled back. Nothing more. No words. Just charm. Just grace. Just eyes that spoke without sound. Then, as suddenly as it began, the drums slowed. The first dance was over. Twinkle felt it immediately. Her heart skipped. She remembered the warning. She stepped back. Before the prince could speak, before he could even take another step toward her, she bowed slightly, just enough to be respectful, and turned away. She walked swiftly out of the courtyard, ran into the garden, her breath coming fast now. Her eyes scanned the flowers desperately. Then she saw it. A sunflower. Bright, tall, standing alone. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the crown. For a moment, she hesitated, feeling its weight, its beauty. Then she remembered the tree's voice. She removed it carefully and placed it at the center of the sunflower. The crown shimmered once, then went still. Twinkle turned and ran. At the edge of the palace grounds, the carriage waited. She climbed in just as the horses began to move. The palace faded behind her. The carriage rolled into the bush, deeper and deeper, until suddenly it stopped. Twinkle blinked. Before she could speak, the carriage dissolved into thin air. The horses vanished. The gown faded. The diamond necklace disappeared. Her shoes crumbled like dust. Twinkle stood alone on the dusty path, wearing her old clothes again, breathing hard. She didn't panic.
She ran. By the time she reached the compound, Susu and Apple were already returning from the palace, laughing loudly, talking over each other. Twinkle rushed inside, quickly grabbing the bowl. She pretended to separate rice from ashes, her head bent low, her hands moving slowly. Susu burst in moments later. She froze. The bowl, the rice, perfectly separated, not a grain of ash in sight. Susu's mouth opened, then closed. How did you do it? Susu demanded. Twinkle did not answer. She kept her head down, quietly picking invisible grains. Susu hissed under her breath, then walked away. But outside the palace walls, the prince stood restless, his heart troubled by a maiden who danced like destiny and vanished like a secret. And somewhere in the garden, a sunflower held a crown that would soon speak louder than words. That evening, Apple could hardly contain herself. She paced the compound excitedly, her feet barely touching the ground as she replayed the events of the festival in her head. The drums, the crowd, the prince, and most of all, the mysterious maiden who had stolen the entire palace's breath. She finally found Twinkle sitting on a wooden stool, picking beans. Apple sat beside her and began talking excitedly. She told her everything that happened at the palace, about the mysterious maiden, the cheering crowd, the drums, and the way the prince had danced. She laughed as she spoke. I danced so well, Apple said proudly. The prince couldn't take his eyes off me. Everyone saw it. She shook her head mockingly. It's just a pity you didn't get to witness any of it. Twinkle kept her head down, quietly picking the beans she had been ordered to pick. Apple continued, enjoying every word. She even added, you should pray harder for me, because that's the only way you'll ever step into the palace when I become queen. She smiled cruelly. You'll be my personal maid. You'll follow me everywhere. Twinkle said nothing. She didn't argue. She didn't look up. She only continued selecting the beans, one by one, her silence heavier than any reply. That night, far away from the compound, the prince could not sleep. He wandered into the palace garden, the quiet place where he always went to think, the same spot he sat every evening to unwind. As he approached, something caught his eye. A crown, resting carefully on the sunflower's head. His breath caught. He picked it up slowly. This, he whispered, turning it in his hands. This is hers. The same crown that rested on the mysterious maiden's head as she danced. The same crown that glimmered under the palace lights. She was here, he said softly. He called his guard at once. Take this crown, the prince commanded. Keep it safely in my chamber. Tomorrow I will return it to her myself. The guard bowed. Yes, your highness. But the next day came, and the mysterious maiden did not come. The drums played, the maidens danced, the palace filled again, but she was nowhere. The prince searched with his eyes. He waited. He stood. He asked.
She's not here yet?
Nothing.
No, your highness.
By midday, his patience ran out. He stood before the crowd and raised his hand. Enough, he said firmly. The woman this crown belongs to is not here. I will not wait any longer, the prince continued. Tomorrow, I will go into the village myself. I will find the maiden whose head this crown fits. Susu's heart pounded. A crown-fitting test? A village search?
Apple!
She called sharply. Yes, Mama. We must make sure that crown fits your head. When they got home, she stood and moved toward a hidden calabash at the corner of the room. Inside it was a dark liquid, thick, bubbling faintly, a concoction.
This will make you
Susu said
irresistible.
slowly, will make you
Mama,
irresistible.
you are the best.
Apple's eyes lit up. Mama, you are the best. Susu smiled. But even she was not prepared for what the concoction would do. That night, Apple drank it, and by morning, when Apple woke up, she stretched lazily, already smiling to herself. That was the day the prince would come searching, the day she would finally be chosen. She jumped out of bed and rushed to the mirror, humming proudly. But the moment her eyes met her reflection, she screamed. A loud, thunderous scream tore through the compound. Her eyes were bulging unnaturally, red and swollen. Her nose had stretched and turned an angry shade of crimson. Her neck, long, stiff, looked nothing like it did the night before. Her face had lost all softness, replaced with something frightening, something wrong. Apple staggered back, clutching her chest. No, 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 this is not me, she cried. She ran to the mirror again, hoping it was a trick of the light, but it wasn't. Her body began to move strangely. Her hands shook, her legs bent awkwardly. She laughed suddenly, then cried, then laughed again, like someone whose mind had snapped in half. Her scream summoned Susu at once. Susu rushed into the room. She froze. The sight before her drained the color from her face. Apple turned slowly, her bulging eyes rolling. Look at me! Look at what you did to me! Susu rushed forward, grabbing her daughter's face, turning it left and right in panic. No, this cannot be. She ran for her charms, her gauds, her powders. She chanted, she spat incantations, she burnt leaves and muttered words under her breath. Nothing worked. Apple only grew worse. She began to pace the room, muttering to herself, scratching at her skin, laughing loudly for no reason. Susu's hands trembled. For the first time in years, fear crept into her heart. Outside, the village drums began to sound. Boom, boom, boom. The prince is coming, voices shouted. The prince is in the village. Susu's heart sank. She had waited for this day, but not like this. Soon, the royal procession arrived. Guards, elders, and the prince himself, moving from house to house, testing the crown on every maiden. Wherever they went, the crown refused to fit. It's not her. Move on. Not this one. At last, they reached Linus's compound. Susu's stomach twisted. Villagers gathered, whispering excitedly. Linus has 2 daughters. Yes, one very beautiful one. Susu stepped forward quickly, forcing a smile. My lord, please, my daughter is not feeling well today. The prince raised an eyebrow. Bring her out. Susu hesitated. When Apple finally stumbled out, supported by Susu, the compound fell silent. Then, laughter erupted. Some villagers covered their mouths, others gasped, children pointed openly. What happened to her? Is this sickness or madness? Apple suddenly screamed again, flailing her arms, her voice hoarse and wild. Susu wanted the ground to open and swallow her. The prince stepped back slightly. This is not the one, he said calmly. Susu's face burned with shame. You should see the other one, the villager said. Susu laughed louder. My lord, the other girl is nothing, just a servant, poor, dirty, not even fit to stand before royalty. The villagers murmured. Bring her, the prince said. Twinkle was called. She stepped out quietly, her head bowed, her clothes plain, her feet dusty from chores. The same girl that fetched water, the same girl that slept on the floor, the same girl Susu had mocked and beaten. When the guard lifted the crown and gently placed it on her head, the crown fit perfectly, not too tight, not too loose, as though it had been waiting for her. The prince stepped closer, his eyes locked on her face. It's you, he whispered. You are the one. Twinkle lifted her eyes slowly, and for the first time since her mother vanished, hope bloomed. But far away beneath the river tree, the wind rustled softly, as if something or someone was watching and smiling. Then Twinkle stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but she gathered courage and spoke loudly so everyone could hear. She told the villagers how Maui had been turned into a goat, how she had suffered in silence, and how Susu's jealousy had destroyed her life. The crowd gasped. The prince turned sharply to Susu and demanded the truth. Cornered and trembling, Susu was forced to confess. She admitted everything she had done to Maui and Twinkle. She confessed that the goat slaughtered and shared in the village had been Maui herself. Immediately, panic broke out. People who had eaten the meat began to vomit violently, crying out in fear. Many swore on the spot that they would never again eat in anyone's house. Susu sobbed harder and confessed one last thing, that the spell meant to beautify her daughter had backfired, turning Apple into what she had become. As her confession ended, the spell broke. Before everyone's eyes, Susu screamed and transformed into a black goat. Some villagers ran home, unable to watch the abomination. An elder stepped forward and spoke with final authority. Let her roam the village and the bushes. This shall be the punishment for her wicked and inhumane heart. The prince then took Twinkle by the hand and led her away. He brought her to the palace. Linus returned days later from his business trip. When he heard what had happened, he screamed. He tore his clothes. He fell to the ground, shaking. He remembered the day the goat was slaughtered. He remembered eating the meat, enjoying it. He never recovered. From that day on, Linus wandered the compound like a shadow of himself, silent, broken, haunted. He died weeks later, a man crushed by truth. Twinkle married the prince in a grand ceremony. The entire village gathered. Drums roared, women danced, the land celebrated. Susu and Apple watched from afar, silent, broken, forgotten. The next morning, Twinkle returned to the river. She knelt before the great tree. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered through tears. The tree's voice came softly. "My daughter, my time is done. You have risen above pain, you have forgiven, you have survived. Live well." Then the tree vanished, gone. Twinkle cried, but she understood. Twinkle inherited all of Linus's lands, all his farms, all his wealth. She became queen and the richest woman in the village. As for Susu and Apple, they roamed the bushes. Children chased them with stones. Elders whispered warnings. Legends say they still wander to this day, eating grass, crying at night. And Linus, they say his spirit never rested, because some sins are too heavy for a man to survive. And so the story ends, with justice, with truth, with a crown that never belonged to wicked hands, and a reminder whispered by the wind: what you bury in hatred will rise in judgment.